I'm not sure if Parth has royally stitched me up here or done me a favour by making me go first. I wonder if he suspects that the chances of me coming up here slightly intoxicated due to nerves dramatically increase as the day goes on. Probably shouldn't say that to a doctor. Okay, I'm Jen Grieves and we're starting in the gutter. Okay, when I was very little, about 3 years old, according to my mum, I climbed up onto the arm of the sofa and stood up, tall and proud. Then, without warning, I leapt with complete conviction and absolute determination into the wall of our living room. Straight into that wall, convinced I was going to fly through into a magical land. And this predates platform 9 3/4, can I say. I didn't make it to the magical land, but for the next week, my mum had to explain not one, but 2 black eyes to her friends, my nursery teachers, my grandparents, and the doctor. And from this, we can learn 2 things about who I am. Firstly, I very innocently, but quite clearly, am intent on a path of self-injury. And secondly, but more importantly, I thought I could fly through a wall made of concrete. Why is that important? Well, because at 3 years old, aside from not quite grasping the laws of physics, I hadn't yet learned the concept of self-doubt. I hadn't yet learned to worry about what other people thought of me, and I hadn't yet learned to fear failure. For a long time now, I've written a blog about my life with type 1 diabetes. And while there are many other superior blogs out there who will detail the latest medical advancements or plot on an axis the average blood sugar spike after an evening meal over a period of 2 months, broken down by food type, I have never been able to manage my condition in this way. I've always been a person who weighs the emotional value of an experience very heavily over more rational or scientific logic. Emotional value for me wins out, and it's the only thing I can speak to, real stories about personal experience, and that is what my blog is. Just like that child that leapt off the sofa and almost broke her nose, I have fumbled in the proverbial dark when it comes to my diabetes, naively believing I can do something until it becomes quite obvious that I absolutely cannot, trying my damnedest not to die from a royal cock-up that would have been 100% my fault, owing to the obvious warning signs and alarm bells and hazard lights that are consistently present before I do something profoundly stupid, but only notice with the benefit of hindsight. My blog is ultimately about being a human, a messy, imperfect whirlwind of a human that has somehow managed to keep herself alive despite not having a functioning pancreas. Writing has helped me, and hopefully others, navigate what is a frustrating, embarrassing, random condition and view it instead as character building. Sure. More likely it's just a good story. Documenting these experiences was very selfishly born out of a need to educate myself about my condition. It had become clear that the way I was managing my diabetes was doing me absolutely no favours. I had crashed through my university education in a blaze of self-loathing and come out the other side with a diagnosis of background retinopathy. The sketchy and vague nature of that diagnosis led me very firmly to believe I was about to go completely blind. This came at a time when I just started to piece myself together to figure out who I was in the world. I was embarking on my professional career, and I was really excited about it. I saw all that about to be taken away from me because of something I had done to myself. Just to rewind a bit here, my behaviour until that point had been, for a good few years, destructive and desperate. Life is a complicated path as it is. One that is drowned in self-loathing is a daily Everest. It's exhausting. You're out in the wilderness with a map that's 20 years out of date, shoes that don't quite fit, and a torch that needs new batteries. There is no water, and there is definitely no gin. So then imagine if you take your rations and your torch and your map and your shoes and you throw the whole lot off the nearest cliff. You refuse to accept help from any passers-by, and you sabotage yourself because you think you deserve to suffer. I've been there. I've been in the darkest, loneliest corner of wilderness with only myself for company at a time when I couldn't bear the thought of being me. Daily, I told myself I wasn't good enough, I wasn't thin enough, I was disgusting and worthless and incapable, and I didn't match up to anyone else out there. What I didn't know is that generally everyone else is also navigating in the dark. They were just better at looking for the light. What I came to understand over time was that it was the messages out there in society that were telling me I wasn't good enough. And I believed them all, completely and wholly. They were encouraging me to compare myself to everyone else based simply on the way I looked and to find fault with just about every part of me. But that's what they want you to believe, because that's when they can make some money. So to navigate life without going completely mad, you have to learn to like yourself. And when you have a chronic condition like we do, it's even more crucial that you show yourself some love. Causing my own potential blindness and the guilt that came with that was what provoked a long and slow path to self-acceptance. So the blog began, and I started to take responsibility for myself and my condition, documenting it all along the way. And it was and still is a long journey and something I have to practice every day. Actively managing my diabetes, and dare I say it, embracing my diabetes, just like learning to like yourself, is a marathon and not a sprint. I don't need to tell you guys how difficult it is to live with type 1 diabetes and maintain perspective on just how well you're doing, to continue to practice self-compassion when the numbers don't add up. My intense loathing for myself was not caused by living with type 1 diabetes, but it was certainly compounded by it. And then the extent to which I could manage my condition suffered hugely as a result. I was wasting my precious life and my precious energy for years, instead insisting on hurting myself with my HbA1c getting higher and higher all the time. Here's where this all ties in: perspective. My belief that I was worthless and useless and fat and ugly was not the truth. It was my perspective of how I superficially measured up against the people around me. It wasn't until I changed my perspective that I could understand that these thoughts were exactly that, simply the way I had framed my reality rather than the reality itself. The sense of frustration that many of us feel around our type 1 diabetes, I believe, often comes from the fact that this condition is completely thrust upon us without say-so, without warning, and it's something we suddenly have to deal with for life, day in, day out, 24/7. Hello, nice person over there. Oh, by the way, you're now a scientist. Oh, you're a nutritionist too. And a psychologist. And a mathematician. That's a serious workload. Just to add to the pressure, historically, the guidebooks and the textbooks and the resources out there tended to focus on the numbers. They talk about target ranges and conformity to good blood glucose levels. So much is expected of us all the time, despite the fact that the parameters never, ever, ever stop shifting. So our framing of reality of what it means to successfully live with type 1 diabetes is shaped for us before we even begin. So I'm going to say it. I think that framing is backwards. The temptation to blame yourself for not predicting exactly the blood sugar result of running for the bus, divided by a stressful day at work, to the square root of having a cold during a mild heat wave is something I've known firsthand. But when you put it like that, how ridiculous is it that we're expected to calculate this at all? As long as you're giving it a go, there is no perfect way of handling type 1 diabetes. Do I have hypos? Yes. I took my insulin this morning and very nearly walked out the door without having my breakfast. You really have to tell yourself that you're doing okay, more than okay, because you really are, and that's the key to this in my mind. It's so incredibly liberating. Everything suddenly becomes a success. And if, like me, you regard being able to put your pants on the right way around as a success, we've just set ourselves up to achieve really great things. I realize that the term self-loathing is an extreme one, and it may not be something you've ever felt, so I don't want to give you ideas. I'm talking more about a lack of self-compassion, a low-level but frequent berating of yourself for getting things ever so slightly less than what the world deems to be perfect. And that lack of self-compassion is called prejudice. Prejudice against the self, as your view of you is over-analysed and over-scrutinised, as the books tell you to do. But a lack of self-compassion goes hand in hand with increased experiences of failure. Not to mention stress, and we all know what stress does to blood glucose levels. If a child gets 7 out of 10 in a maths test at school, do you tell them they're useless? I really hope not. No, you say, great job. So I'm saying, great job, guys. So here's an equation I can finally get on board with. Being kind to yourself means you will achieve more. We can't control the diagnosis of type 1 diabetes, but we control how we live our lives from that point on. It's all about the value you place on it, and that ultimately is a choice. Did you keep yourself alive today? Yes. You're freaking awesome. The one thing about diabetes that is guaranteed, just the one mind, because everything else is anyone's guess, is that there's always more to learn. Learn about carbohydrate counting, take an interest in the pattern of your blood sugar levels, know what your options are when it comes to treatment, and take an interest in the food you eat and the exercise you do, sure, but don't place everything you have on getting it right all the time. There are many, many times when I've been overwhelmed by this condition, drowned in its complexities, its ability to turn your wonderful day into a slightly terrifying one when you're caught with a low blood sugar without a jelly baby in sight. But you can allow yourself to have a moment and then crack on and be all the things that you are. An artist, an architect, a good friend, a mum, a traveller, a supreme bagpipe player. I know there's one of you in here somewhere. A misfit, whatever it is that gives you your purpose, keep pushing. And don't let a 5-minute hypo take all the great things out of the rest of the 23 hours and 55 minutes that are left of your day. The self-fulfilling nature of this outlook cannot be overstated. If you're mean to yourself, it will hold you back from experiencing life. It will make you sad, and you'll pass that anger and bitterness and sadness onto others. It will leave you locked in your room instead of going out and becoming a human with so many positive experiences and memories. I'm a better friend, a nicer person, a greater sister, a better daughter, a more compassionate earthling, because I've learned to accept who I am and what I've got. There must be an element of that within you all, otherwise you wouldn't have turned up here today ready to talk and share your experiences. And that's not an easy thing to do. To hold the belief that I'm doing okay, despite the mess-ups and the injuries and the ridiculous situations I frequently find myself in, is a perception, sure. But it's no more a perception than the one I used to have, the destructive one that told me I deserved unhappiness, who was disengaged with her condition, whose blood glucose meter had dust on it from a lack of use. I know which belief serves me better, and I actually love being an idiot because it's who I am. It's fun, and it's really disarming to people who take themselves too seriously. I don't want to be defined by my suffering, so I'm choosing to make my suffering a success instead. And just like 3-year-old me, who so confidently leapt into a concrete wall, maybe I am, in fact, flying in the face of the impossible. I'm absolutely sure you all are too. You just have to choose to believe it.